What's the first thing you notice on one of these when you pick up and play one of these Gameboy Advance SPs? Well, that it opens and closes. But how? These little guys called hinges. For what would a Gameboy Advance SP be without these hinges? Nothing but a regular Game Boy. These hinges seem to cause a lot of confusion, and they're more difficult than they seem to be. So join me as you become YouTube certified on Gameboy Advance SP Hinges. Of all the SP consoles I've opened up, the factory hinges that I've found 3 different distinct styles of factory hinges. 2 of them being universal hinges, where it does not matter which side they go on, and then one of them being a sided hinge, so right side and left side. 95% of the time it is this style of hinge with the white top, white bottom, white top, black bottom. The white bottom signifying that it's a right hinge, and the black bottom signifying that it's a left hinge. I tend to say white is right, it rhymes, so it works out. But there's also some other distinct features with these hinges that you can tell if they are a right or a left hinge. If you look closely, there's this little swoop right here. On the right hinge, it swoops to the right. And here, the black left hinge, that little swoop swoops to the left. So that's how you identify the side of the hinge. Now for the universal style hinges, these are basically identical. The only real difference I've seen is that the top metal portion on this style has a little divot, the little U shape there, and this side does not. It is flat on both sides. Whereas this side is flat on one side and has that opposite shape. These don't matter where you install them, whether it's right or left. They will both click open and click closed when you install the hinge. Aftermarket hinges. There are a multitude of aftermarket hinges. I have just 3 here, or possibly 2, and possibly a 4th factory style hinge. The problem with aftermarket hinges, and the problem with buying hinges from somebody, period, is that they are almost never labeled as a right or left hinge. So the unsuspecting consumer will buy the hinges expecting that it's the proper hinges, and they have no idea that there's a right or a left hinge, and they put, let's say, 2 left hinges on their console versus a right and a left, or they put 2 right hinges versus a right and a left. I found that this black hinge here in the middle is a very common hinge that I've seen for sale online. Even on many of your reputable game shops, or your game repair shop. I want to say I saw these on Handheld Legend as well. This is purely a left hinge. There's no position that you can install this or turn it to install it on the right side as well. If you install it on the right side, you will have a hinge that opens and clicks open, but you won't have a hinge that closes and clicks shut. This other style I actually found was by chance. I ordered from Handheld Legend. On Handheld Legend, again, they didn't say if they sold a right or left hand hinge, but if you look on the hinge on their site and look at the hinge, you'll notice that they have a right hinge. It'll have the little swoop that swoops to the right. It has the white base, so I ordered 20 of them. Well, what showed up? Not a right hinge, because I have a bunch of left hinges, so I wanted some right hinges. That didn't show up. This hinge actually showed up, which is another type of universal hinge, which I must say I ended up keeping. I was going to send it back because it was sold as not described, and I just tried one out, and it ended up being a universal hinge. It was actually a pretty solid hinge for that. It clicked open and clicked closed, both on opening and on closing. This other style hinge that I've come across here has a gray top and a gray bottom. This I bought from AliExpress under the thought that this would also be, I believe, a right hinge. I'm not sure if this is meant to be a universal hinge. It kind of seems like it would be. There's no swoop on there. But when I attempt to install this, I install it, it clicks open, but I really cannot get a nice solid click shut. So again, with aftermarket hinges, it's really better if you have a good console is to remove and salvage the hinges you have in your console. I've yet to find a hinge that is truly better than the right and left factory hinge that has the swoop. From the click open to the snap shut, I've always found that these sided hinges are the best. And that's what I continue to use in 95% of my consoles. And that is what I find in 95% of the consoles that I open up and refurbish. To remove these hinges, they must be removed from the open position. It is the only way that the keyway is lined up in order to let the hinge basically drop out. There's no excessive force needed. They'll 95% of the time slide right out if you do it the proper way. If you look here on my right, I have a big pen. I just took this apart. I used some pliers to hold that and pull out the cartridge and the ballpoint end of it. And then I simply took a pair of flush cutters and I cut the top off. That tip right here is the exact size you need to start to push this hinge out. So if we zoom in, you see the teeth of the hinge there that grip onto the console. What we'll do is slide this over and we'll begin to push it out until it slightly protrudes, like so. Then we'll open to the open position. Take a screwdriver or your tweezers, and from the open position, we'll simply push it the rest of the way out. How this works is if you look on each shell, there's a keyway. If you look on the other side of the shell, there's also a keyway which is a little bit fatter. When these are slid together, on the closed position, the keyways do not line up. So if you're attempting to remove this in the closed position, you're forcing the hinge against that keyway, and you're going to either break the shell or crack the hinge, and you're not going to have a fun time trying to get this hinge out. Whereas if you start it from the closed position, open to the open position now, versus if you look here from the open position, the keyways line up, giving the hinge an easy way to be pushed out. Again, on removal, with the hinge installed, let's say you remove it now from the closed position. If you were to get this out in the closed position, the hinge is now in the closed position when you remove it. So when you attempt to install it in the open position, you now have a hinge that is in the closed position installed into the console in the open position. Like so. If I take this hinge here and I twist it, and I've got it to the open position, well, now you see that the keyway on the hinge here, the keyway is not lined up. It's offset. So from the base of the hinge to the top, one side is lined up and the other side is in the middle. It is not lined up. Versus if you have the hinge in the open position, you can see now that these keyways are perfectly lined up. This is how the hinge must be removed and installed onto the console, while the shell is again in the open position. It can be started in the closed position, but it must be finished in the open position. Installation. Just as reverse as the removal of the hinges, the hinge must be installed in the open position. So here, We have a hinge. The hinge is in the open position. We can start it with the console closed. Open it to the open position, apply some pressure, and it snaps right in. Console snaps closed, console opens. Installation of the universal hinges. Again, as I said earlier, it doesn't matter. These are both the universal hinges. We'll put a cap on it. And I'll install this hinge here on the right side again with the shell closed, and finish it with the shell open. Snaps closed, snaps open. We'll start the hinge. Once it makes a protrusion like so. Where did my screwdriver go? We will pop it the rest of the way, open it, and slide the hinge out from the open position. We have an open position hinge. We'll install it on the opposite side. All the way in, snaps closed, snaps open. So these universal side hinges, as long as they're removed and the hinge is in the open position, then it does not matter which side that these hinges are installed onto. Another factor with installation with your aftermarket hinges here. So this is the hinge that I got from Handheld Legend, and it is a universal hinge, so it will work on either side. But if you install it, and sometimes I find that with these aftermarkets, there's sometimes a very much tighter fit like that. So we have it installed. Snaps closed, snaps open. Now we want to remove it. I tend to find with these aftermarket hinges, when you go to remove them, so it's just starting to protrude there, I can pop it the rest of the way. I find that the inside keyway will no longer grip onto the base of the hinge, and you'll go to open it, and the hinge internally, the base is not turning anymore. So you no longer have a open position hinge, actual hinge piece, when you open up the console. You see it's in there, but it is not turning. You see that the base of the hinge is not turning when I turn this. So now I open it up full way. I go to remove it. It's very difficult to remove because, again, the keyway is not lined up on the hinge with the keyway. Both keyways, the base and the upper part of the hinge, the keyway is not lined up, which makes it very hard to remove. I find a remedy that I need to leave it popped in just a little bit, enough to catch that keyway, so that now when I turn it, you see the base of the hinge is moving. It is now opening with the console, and now we have an open position hinge that we can remove with very little pressure. Again, it's aftermarket, so it's a little more than factory, but again, not too much pressure to get that out. Hinge caps. Factory hinge caps are always going to be the best. Some aftermarket style of hinges, though, will have a rivet on the top, which will stop you from installing a factory hinge without trimming this center portion out. Without trimming this center portion so that the rivet has room to be inside of that hinge cap. If you're restoring a console and you want to keep it as factory as possible, these two hinges right here are from the same exact console. The sun and maybe smoke, I'm not sure, degrades the plastic and it makes it this nasty color. You see, they're both blue. What I do to restore these little hinges, if I want to use them, is I'll take some 1500 grit sandpaper and just run it back and forth on it until it removes any scratches or imperfections, and it's nice and smooth and shiny again. So you can restore the factory hinge caps, and that's probably the best way to go if you want to spend that kind of time on your console. So you see, these little hinges don't have to be so difficult. As long as you remember which side they go on, the proper orientation that they need to be installed in, opened, closed, you'll be alright. If you're looking to be YouTube certified in other categories of the Gameboy Advance SP, everything you see behind me is parts and consoles and items strictly for the Gameboy Advance SP. You can go ahead and subscribe. I'll be putting out videos to do with charging faults, audio faults, just basically every little thing down to the smallest detail to do with the Gameboy Advance SP. And if you're just looking to buy a fancy console, actually I have those as well. I'll put my Etsy shop and eBay down in the description, and you can check out some of those consoles. Maybe you'll like one.